Welcome to a show where you will hear about how our liberty is being eroded by the very people that swear an oath to protect it.
Today, the president signed a big new anti-terrorism bill that would expand the government's ability to track down terrorists, but at some cost.
On this show, we will discuss many of the lies that the government that hates us, by the way, we will discuss the lies that the people in positions of power and influence spread every day.
And what is the best way to confuse children? Confuse them about their sexuality, confuse them about their gender, expose them to things that their little brains are not ready for yet. That is how they are confusing children. It is leading to chaos, and Big Daddy government, of course, can be there to pick us all up and take care of us at the end of it.
We will also talk about how current elected leadership at all levels of government has been corrupted by power and control, as well as discuss the types of leadership needed to correct our republic's course.
We the people. It was time to remember that we the people are the government.
Providing assistance for the Ukrainians to defeat the Russians, that's the number one priority for the United States right now.
I am your host, Larry Linton, retired U.S. Navy Command Master Chief and prior Tennessee House of Representatives District 12 candidate, and welcome to the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. Welcome to this week's show, ladies and gentlemen, the final one from the road for a while. This week, I'm coming to you from Tyler, Texas again. Earlier this week, I was working in Jena, Louisiana. Well, that was where I was working with the crews, but I was actually staying in Alexandria, Louisiana. So, it was a little bit more than an hour commute to and from the locations where I did most of my consulting. I have a couple of meetings here in Tyler this week, along with another visit to a remote site for a final field engagement. In addition to the coaching on various locations this past week, I had the opportunity to work with a new business partner to get them up to speed on this project before he takes the reins for the next 3 weeks while I'm at home with my bride. The last time I was in Louisiana before this past week was in 1989. That was when I was stationed in Meridian, Mississippi, attending a Navy school. I would travel down to New Orleans on the weekends for some great liberty. So, while I had been in Louisiana before, I'd never been to this part of the state that I was working in. And as I mentioned to you at the start, Louisiana was the next to last stop during this coaching engagement. After these 3 long weeks, I'll be returning to my beloved Tennessee in the Smoky Mountains to be with my family. Speaking of my beloved Tennessee, that is where this week's topic of liberty takes us. Since my state has been in the national limelight for several weeks now because of the tragic Christian school shooting, well, Tennessee was not in the limelight for the targeted killing of Christians. It received national attention because of the blunders of the GOP supermajority in the General Assembly. As we discuss liberty this week, I believe we need to focus on the aftermath of that horrible event, but never forget the tragedy that unfolded and led to these events we'll discuss today. Because like similar horrible events across our republic in the past, the simple-minded are once again going after the tool used and not the root cause of these events. And let's not forget the names and ages of the Christians that were murdered. It was Evelyn Dykhouse, a 9-year-old little girl, Mike Hill, a 61-year-old man, William Kinney, another 9-year-old child, Catherine Kuntz, a 60-year-old lady, Cynthia Peak, a 61-year-old lady, and Hallie Scruggs, a 9-year-old little girl and the daughter of the lead pastor at the church there. I will not mention the name of the perpetrator of this act, but we'll discuss things that are publicly known about the individual. First, the young lady identified as transgender. I will say this until I'm blue in the face. That is a mental illness. It's called gender dysphoria. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. This young lady attended that Christian school as a child. This young lady, can't stress that point enough, this young lady made a choice to attack that particular school from among others she was considering. This school was chosen by this mentally ill young lady from among others because it was less protected, meaning it was fully compliant with federal and state gun-free zone requirements. A gun-free zone where this young lady brought guns for the purpose of killing. Listen carefully here. For the purpose of killing Christian adults and children. This would be called a hate crime by the usurpers and ruling elite had the faith of the people slaughtered by the mentally ill young lady had been anything, and I repeat this, anything other than Christianity. So, what are the facts so far? She was a mentally ill young lady. I guess that could be her pronoun now, was, were, instead of he, him. She chose a soft, gun-free zone target from among other targets that were not as soft. She killed Christians. Outside of those facts, coupled with a social media message she sent to a friend, we are left to guess as to what exactly drove her to commit these senseless murders. Of course, law enforcement is not releasing the contents of her manifesto, which will provide the public with clarity as to her motivations at this time. When, or if, they do release the manifesto, it will officially confirm why she selected that school and those people. Are government officials reluctant to release the contents of that manifesto because it will confirm suspicions about her motivations? You know that's why. But up until then, we can make the assumption based upon the facts already evident in this slaughter. Now let's consider other facts and evidence. Did the usurper-in-chief, the ice cream connoisseur, make any mention of this slaughter of Christians in Nashville last month? Did he mention it being a hate crime? No, he has not. In fact, he laughed about it when a reporter asked if he agreed with the United States Senator that went on record as calling it a hate crime. But let's go back a couple of years now to the spring of 2021. That's when the child sniffer-in-chief had this to say, via an official White House statement that is still up on its website about the murders of some people that occurred at that time. Here's the official statement. Let's see if you can pick up on some very key things in it. Quote, Jill and I share the nation's grief and outrage at the horrific killings of 8 people, among them 6 Asian American women in Georgia on March 16th. While we do not yet know motive, as I said last week, we condemn in the strongest possible terms the ongoing crisis of gender-based and anti-Asian violence that has long plagued our nation. I urge Congress to swiftly pass the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which would expedite the federal government's response to the rise of hate crimes exacerbated during the pandemic, support state and local governments to improve hate crimes reporting, and ensure that hate crimes information is more accessible to Asian American communities. Unquote. Now, there's more to that statement, because what politician is not fond of a bunch of fluff that is filled with artful lies being spun by the new aristocracy in order to enact policies that are designed to erode your liberty? Moving on, though, as I said, we won't cover the rest of the official statement because I believe it is unnecessary to get to the point that I would like for us to arrive at. Actually, several points. Point 1, 8 total people killed. Point 2, 6 of the 8 were Asian ethnicity. So break that down, if you will. 6 of the 8 were Asian, meaning 75% of the people murdered led the President of the United States of America to declare this a hate crime against Asian Americans. Point 3, Old Corn Pop's nemesis stated for a fact that the motivation was not known at the time of the murders. Yet he used the full force of his office to condemn it as a hate crime and to push for the passage of legislation to enhance the reporting of and law enforcement actions against, hate crimes. Point 4, he mentioned how anti-Asian violence, which he stated, quote, has long plagued our nation, unquote, but failed to mention that it was the Democrats and a Democrat president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that committed the largest anti-Asian hate crime in the history of our republic. Old FDR, through one of the favorite and unconstitutional tools the government uses, presidential executive orders, he stripped Americans of Asian ethnicity of their constitutionally protected rights through their internment in camps during World War II. It was an act that the History Channel, which is not a bastion of conservatism by any means, had this to say about it, quote, "The incarceration of Japanese Americans is considered one of the most atrocious violations of American civil rights in the 20th century," unquote. And another point, he called it a gender-based hate crime. All of the victims in that situation weren't women. Now, I just used those 5 points to highlight the government's hypocrisy when it comes to labeling things as hate crimes. More to the point, not labeling things as hate crimes that are quite obviously hate crimes. Why? The citizens must always ask the why question, especially as it relates to government action or inaction. The inaction, or not calling what happened in Nashville a hate crime, is purely agenda-driven. You see, if the ruling elite label what happened in Nashville, or many other similar instances that have happened in the past decade, as a hate crime against Christians and Christianity itself, it levels the playing field with their created subgroups of citizens. Government absolutely cannot have that. I believe Tucker Carlson nailed it when he had this to say about the trans movement and Christians. Give it a listen.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. It was just last week that we noticed that parts of the transgender movement seem to be getting militant and possibly dangerous. We did a whole segment about it on Thursday night. That segment was sparred by an NPR segment we had heard and never expected to hear. NPR has always, as a matter of editorial policy, completely opposed the civilian ownership of firearms, with the possible exception of maybe IRS agents. Yet here suddenly was that very same station, National Public Radio, positively urging trans people to buy guns, as many guns as possible, and if necessary, to use them. "The world is dangerous," explained one trans gun owner. "You have to be dangerous back." And that seems strange to us. Is the United States really a dangerous place for trans people? Well, West Baltimore is dangerous. You could easily get murdered there. But if you're trans in this country, obviously there are many downsides, but there do appear to be some benefits. It's a lot easier to get into Harvard, for example. It's definitely easier to get a job at Citibank or in the Biden White House. If you're transgender and can so much as fly a kite, the Pentagon will happily make you an F-35 pilot, just so Hollywood can make a movie about it. Identifying as trans, whatever, again, its downsides, does convey status in this country, which is why so many young people now do. Not a lot of 19-year-olds are pretending to be car mechanics or linemen for a regional power company in eastern Ohio, but plenty of college freshmen do pretend to be members of the opposite sex. And why wouldn't they? The people in charge despise working-class whites, but they venerate the trans community. People are just responding to incentives. It's rational in a way. But that does not explain the anger that we heard in that NPR segment. Why are some trans people so angry, and why do they seem to be mad specifically at traditional Christians? We can't think of any trans person who's ever been murdered by a pastor. As far as we know, that has never happened. So it's not an actual threat of violence from Christians that's inspiring some trans people to buy AR-15s. No, it's got to be more fundamental than that, and it is. The trans movement is the mirror image of Christianity, and therefore its natural enemy. In Christianity, the price of admission is admitting that you're not God. Christians openly concede that they have no real power over anything, and for that matter, very little personal virtue. They will tell you to your face that they are sinful and helpless and basically absurd. They're not embarrassed about any of this. They brag about it. That saved a wretch like me, goes the most famous Christian hymn ever written in English. The trans movement takes the opposite view. Trans ideology claims dominion over nature itself. We can change the identity we were born with, they will tell you with wild-eyed certainty. Christians can never agree with this statement because these are powers they believe God alone possesses. That unwillingness to agree, that failure to acknowledge a trans person's dominion over nature, incites and enrages some in the trans community. People who believe they're God can't stand to be reminded that they're not. So Christianity and transgender orthodoxy are wholly incompatible theologies. They can never be reconciled. They are on a collision course with each other. One side is likely to draw blood before the other side.
Wow, right? Much as I discussed in last week's episode, the trans community, they're stuck on Saturday, elevating themselves above God and scorning Jesus Christ. So along that vein, if the government were to label these crimes committed by transgenders against Christians as hate crimes, it would, in essence, level the playing field. Again, government cannot have that. Look at how hard they are working to erase anything and everything about Christianity from our culture and our republic. The government and its useful idiots embrace ideologies about the founding of our nation that completely remove or discredit the Christian founding of our nation. That is on purpose as well, because government fully supports raising man and mankind above the Creator, because by raising mankind above God, government, positions itself, because it is a man-made creation, to take the place of God. Well, I sort of went long on that topic, all to lead me to this point of this episode. Because what happened in Nashville and in schools and other gun-free zones across the nation the past few decades have nothing to do with the guns. The guns are just the tools employed by the people with evil intent in their hearts and twisted minds. So why are they going after the tool, you may be wondering? Well, some of you may be wondering, but many of you know the why in this case. Well, it's because firearms are a multi-use tool. And like any other tool, it is the hands that wield it to get the desired outcome that we must focus on. Tools such as firearms can be used for purposes both good and evil. They are inanimate objects that are wielded by human beings. And since this particular tool, a firearm, in the hands of a free people, can stand in the way of implementing tyranny in our republic, well, that multi-use tool needs to be taken out of the hands of the free people and reserved solely for the government. Oh, and you can't forget the elite. This tool, well, it too levels the playing field. Government, as well as all of their useful idiots in legacy media, and most especially in all of their created, aggrieved subgroups of people, all of them cannot stand a level playing field. These two groups, government and the ruling elite, the liberals and commies, want themselves and government, along with those useful idiots, to be the only people in possession of firearms in this country. They want to ensure that Christianity and Christians do not have a level playing field, and they do not want the citizens of a free republic to have a level playing field. It is time to remind the audience of the exact words of the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution. They are this: a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Liberals and commies are really in love with two words in that amendment: regulated and militia. Those are the words that are twisted and misinterpreted using today's vernacular in order to achieve their main objective: the disarming of the regular citizens, the regular American people. That is the unleveling of the playing field. The words they choose to ignore are these: the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It doesn't say the right of the militia, well-regulated or otherwise, nor does it say the right of the government. It doesn't even state the right of certain groups of people. Nope, just the people as a whole, meaning every citizen. Oh, of course, shall not be infringed is also misinterpreted quite frequently. We've played Biden's words on this program before that state clearly what he believes. There's no need to rehash what the head communist in charge thinks about the Second Amendment. What does need to be rehashed is the seeming capitulation from so-called Republican elected leaders to these incremental erosions of our constitutionally protected right to keep and bear arms. Ladies and gentlemen, this is one of those black and white areas of liberty. You are either on one side of the issue or the other, the wrong side. People may think that there is a gray area here, but there isn't. Why do I say that? Well, it is because any small erosion leads to a cascading effect. especially when the government is involved. Never forget why governments are formed. The reason can be found in our Declaration of Independence. I've said it numerous times on this program before, but it bears repeating, especially during this week's episode on liberty. Here we go. From the best breakup letter ever written in the history of mankind, the Declaration of Independence, comes these words: that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Governments are created to secure the people's inalienable rights. Just what does inalienable mean, though? Well, it means unable to be taken away from or given away by the possessor. But what are we witnessing today? Of course, the taking away of our rights, our inalienable rights, by the very institution created to secure those rights. Just how is that possible? Because the consent of the governed, meaning we the people, we have allowed it to happen through our apathy. These erosions of our rights don't happen suddenly, all at once. It happens in increments. Because how do you eat an elephant, ladies and gentlemen? Any third grader knows this. It's one bite at a time. Well, through one bite at a time, we are allowing government to erode these liberties. And the Republican Party has become so filled with weak individuals at the elected levels and is led by duplicitous and dangerous people at the party level. The party of the Constitution has abandoned the Constitution. At least the leadership has. The incrementalism I want to talk about right now are these red flag laws being bandied about in the media and by elected officials at both major parties. And they are being bandied about as just one part of the complete solution to ending what is euphemistically called gun violence in our nation. To fight an enemy, you have to name it. So the agreed upon term among the legacy media and the ruling elite is combating gun violence. Gun violence is only coupled with the words hate crime, though, when a specifically created subgroup of citizens are involved. Since government didn't create the subgroup of Christians, they, according to government, are not deserving of any specially protected status. However, the transgender community, they are deserving of special protection by the government. What used to be, well, it still is actually, a mental illness, is now elevated and celebrated as a unique class of citizens. Now, going back to that earlier Tucker segment, that special group is only created by man and not God. They want to elevate themselves above God. Let's get back to the tool used, though, and the efforts to remove it from the hands of free people, and only leave the tool in the hands of the government and the rest of the ruling elite. Let's leave out the many other types of violence and death that occur every day in our republic that do not involve firearms, but have tallied up more bodies than so-called gun violence, like medical malpractice, for example, or heart failure, because of poor diets or exercise habits of millions of Americans. But the masses, well, they have to have a boogeyman to be afraid of, and the government hands it to them in the form of a tool. The government doesn't want us afraid of doctors or big pharma or the food manufacturers. Nope, they want us afraid enough of a tool that we will willingly allow them to deny us the right to keep and bear that very same tool. Shall not be infringed turns into shall be infringed for our own safety. That leads me to following up on a blog post from this last Saturday. It was the post in which I asked the question, what is the definition of the word conspiracy? Also, what is the definition of conspiracy in the legal sense? Dictionary.com has this for the definition of conspiracy. There are several, and let's list them. 1. A conspiracy is defined as the act of conspiring. Duh. 2. A conspiracy is an unlawful, harmful, or evil plan formulated in secret by two or more persons. A plot. 3. A conspiracy is a combination of persons for such an unlawful, harmful, or evil purpose. Number 4, a conspiracy is an agreement by 2 or more persons to commit a crime, fraud, or other wrongful act. Finally, number 5 states that a conspiracy is any concurrence in action, combination in bringing about a given result. Let's go over to Cornell Law School and find out what a conspiracy is defined as by them. First, we have this. A conspiracy is an agreement between 2 or more people to commit an illegal act along with an intent to achieve the agreement's goal. Most U.S. jurisdictions also require an overt act toward furthering the agreement. An overt act is a statutory requirement, not a constitutional one. The illegal act is the conspiracy's target offense. Conspiracy generally carries a penalty on its own. In addition, conspiracies allow for derivative liability where conspirators can also be punished for the illegal acts carried out by other members, even if they were not directly involved. Thus, where 1 or more members of the conspiracy committed illegal acts to further the conspiracy's goals, all members of the conspiracy may be held accountable for those acts. Where no one has actually committed a criminal act, the punishment varies. Some conspiracy statutes assign the same punishment for conspiracy as for the target offense. Others impose lesser penalties. Conspiracy applies to both civil and criminal offenses. For example, you may conspire to commit murder or conspire to commit fraud. That last part is key. Conspire to commit murder or commit fraud. What I'm going to talk about is committing fraud along with a conspiracy to commit fraud. And both of these conspiracies are tied to senior leadership in the Tennessee General Assembly, ladies and gentlemen. Gee, imagine my shocked face right now. I shared some information in a blog post last week about how the Tennessee Speaker of the House has committed fraud, both election fraud and financial fraud. Go over to my webpage and read the blog post I published on the 14th of April. But now there's another conspiracy to commit fraud upon Tennessee by the Tennessee Senate Majority Leader, Jack Johnson. Give a listen to this audio clip, and we'll come back on the other side with what type of fraud Senator Johnson is conspiring to commit. Here's the soundbite.
Here's another thing, too. I'm going to suggest, if you say red flag, it's dead.
Okay. What's the acronym? Do people prefer ERPO?
ERPO is better, and I think that term has been so bastardized. It's been so tainted. Yeah, red flag laws. So we have to rebrand that.
Do whatever. Do whatever.
In terms of able to get something passed.
Did you catch all the words there in this secret recording in Senator Johnson's office? I would like to bring you back to one of the earliest episodes of this podcast I released, all the way back to episode 4, where I discussed the artful lies legislators use to label legislation in order to get it passed. An artful lie is a deception. It's a fraud. You heard that exact plan, a fraud, being conspired to be hatched right there in that office. A conspiracy to hide their true intentions in getting unconstitutional infringements on Tennesseans' Second Amendment protections. We cannot forget how red flag laws, or anything similar that these legislators rebrand with a new name, these types of laws and requirements violate citizens' 5th and 14th constitutionally protected due process rights. I recently wrote to Tennessee State Senator John Stevens, who is rumored to head up the project, or let's call it what it is, head up the conspiracy to rebrand red flag laws with a name that is more palatable to the general or apathetic public. The conspiracy to defraud citizens. While these conspiracies happen all the time, I believe that the ruling elite have been so comfortable in behaving this way, they have not been very careful with where and when they discuss their conspiracies. Legislators here in Tennessee, based upon that recording, they are conspiring to remove the citizens' constitutionally protected rights to keep and bear a tool. A tool in the hands of a free people, well, it can accomplish a few good things. Not only does this tool provide a human being with the ability to protect life and limb against the rampant criminality enabled by the communists in this country, this tool also enables a free people to stay free. These tools in the hands of a free people are often what keeps a tyrannical government at bay. These same tools that were in the hands of people in 1776 freed this nation from tyranny. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not the guns and they being the government and the legacy media and the rest of the useful idiots in our country, it's not the guns they're after. They're after your liberty, your freedom. Because if common sense gun laws and red flag laws really worked, I propose the following. The stated purpose of red flag laws are to keep guns out of the hands of mentally ill people. Well, transgenderism is a mental illness. The very minute a red flag law is proposed and passed with mental illness as a criteria to remove a citizen's Second, Fifth, and 14th Amendment protections, and law enforcement started confiscating firearms from people that are suffering from the openly admitted mental illness called gender dysphoria, just watch how fast the legacy media and the other useful idiots will call for all red flag laws to be abolished. If you really wanted to target people that suffer from mental illness, prevent them from getting a gun, let's start there. So, that will never happen. Proving that this fight isn't about guns. So keep that in mind as legislators conspire to commit legislative fraud upon the citizens they are supposed to represent. This whole argument, it is really about your ability, our ability, to resist tyranny. The ruling elite do not want a citizenry that can resist tyranny. They don't want a citizenry that can maintain our freedom, our liberty. The ruling elite do not want a level playing field. Well, that is all the time I have for this week's show, ladies and gentlemen. In closing, we have this week's wisdom from God's Word. And today it comes to us from Proverbs 27:12. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. Be prudent. See the danger behind the arguments. Take refuge in your constitutionally protected rights. See the danger behind the conspiracy of artful lies that are used to commit fraud and rob you of your liberty. If you keep simple about this argument, or in this argument, if you just want to be left alone by the government, think about this. If you do not have the ability to defend yourself and your freedom from an ever-increasingly tyrannical government, how long will it be until government stops overlooking the simple? Remember the poem by Martin Niemöller that we talked about before? It was this: first they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. A more accurate version of this would replace socialists with Republicans, trade unionists with conservatives, and Jews with Christians. Because that is what happens in a country where a government disarms its citizens. Thank you all for listening this week, and I pray that you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Until next week, stand in the arena with me. Reveille, it's time to wake up.